It's great to see you. We are starting off a brand new message series today for the month of April. Just 2 weeks later from today, we have Easter Sunday, which is going to be a pretty big deal. We've been praying over that service. We'd encourage you to join us, but another reason that's going to be significant is because of what we're talking about this month. We're talking about God turning our mourning into gladness. Not just sad events, but really the deep doubts and questions that we might have. And that's regardless of whether we're just investigating this Jesus thing or whether we've been a part of the church for years. We have questions. We wonder about things. But oftentimes we don't know where to go, or worse yet, as we'll talk about this morning, we aren't always willing to wait for the answers. Waiting is really, really hard. One of the things that I've noticed about myself, and I've shared bits and pieces of it before, but I'm a pretty patient person when it comes to people. I'm not overly patient when it comes to things. Things and I have not really a love-hate relationship. You might call it more of like a hate-hate relationship when they don't work properly or when I have to wait for something. So one of the things that might kind of share a little bit of what I mean is our middle child is on the verge to becoming one of the most complex drink orderers in Starbucks history. Okay, you ever check out those videos? Yeah, that's the route he's going. So he basically lives off of chocolate milk, but his chocolate milk drink order is refined. We don't do the pre-mixed milk purchase. That's a little bit expensive. We actually, mix 2 ingredients together. Fancy, I know. So this is how we get the drink order from Ezra. Can I have chocolate milk in a green cup with a blue lid, shaken, not stirred, microwaved, that's how he says it, microwaved for 30 seconds, don't let it beep. Don't let it beep. And then the really insulting thing is when you hand it to him and he feels it and he's weighing it out, he's like, is this lukewarm? All right, good, we're good. Now he's recently been adding on to it. Okay, so when you put the milk in, I want chocolate syrup first, then milk, then a little more chocolate. It's getting worse. Now, in all of that actually doesn't bother me. I can take his drink order. I can do that a few times a day, as many as it takes to get some calories in the kid. And I can handle that. That doesn't bother me at all. You want to know what bothers me? Waiting the 30 seconds for a microwave. You wouldn't think it's a big deal, but waiting 30 seconds on a microwave, it seems like an eternity. As I'm just waiting, I'm like, okay, don't let it beep. He's gonna say something if you let it beep. Don't go past 30 seconds. He's gonna complain. He's gonna feel that thing, and it's gonna be a little bit hot. But I'm waiting for this microwave to go off, and 30 seconds, oddly, when you're waiting for a thing, it feels like eternity. We expect everything at a fast pace. We don't want to wait for anything. So I have patience with people, but when it comes to things or waiting, I don't like that one bit. That is hard. The truth is, though, it's hard for all of us. We just went through a little bit of a rebranding for our church. We launched a new website. And one of the things that I learned as we were launching this website is everything has to be lightweight because everybody knows we have a problem waiting for things. So when you develop a website, it has to be lightweight. And here's some of the metrics that people who pay attention to that sort of thing have noticed. First, we aren't willing to scroll beyond what's called the fold. So if you think about like a printed brochure, there's a fold and maybe there's several folds and there's more information in there, but the most pertinent information has to be above the fold because most people aren't going to continue unfolding that thing. A website is the same. If it's not right up top as the web page loads, we are not willing to figure out where it is. Worse yet, I might be doing something. Worse yet, if we're on Google results and we have to go to the second page of search results, that web page is dead. right? We're not going to second or third or fourth page of search results in Google. So we have to keep all the pertinent information up there because we realize we're impatient and we're not going to go searching for it. The other metric is this, 2 to 3 seconds. That's how long we're willing to wait for a web page to load. 2 to 3 seconds. Anybody remember just about 30 years ago when you were waiting for the dial-up tone? And it was not even 2 to 3 minutes, it was worse than that, waiting for a single web page to load. Now the benchmark for a website to load before most people click on something else or abandon that pursuit is about 2 seconds. 40% of people will wait 3 seconds. 2 to 3 seconds is how long we're willing to wait for information or wait for an answer to our questions. That's not a lot. Now, this wouldn't be problematic really outside of web development and all of that, except that we don't keep that mentality to waiting for a website to load. We are impatient in most things. So when it comes to the big questions of life, or when we wrestle out areas of our faith, do we bring that 2 to 3 second mentality in? We want fast answers. We want them now. Don't even wait for the microwave to go off. Snatch that thing out. We want our answers quick. And if we don't get them, we'll abandon that search. If we have to go to the second page, if it's below the fold, we don't want to wait for the answers. We want our answers fast. Now, the problem with this is that it's a relatively new concept in history. Over time in history, most people would wrestle with 1 or 2, maybe 3 questions their entire life. Because they understood that a question, the understanding about how the world works, who we are, and specifically who God is, was worth wrestling out. It was worth waiting longer than 2 to 3 seconds. But today, we don't do that. We want to enter into a journey today of learning how to reclaim the waiting. Learn how to reclaim being able to sit with a question, sit in uncomfortability. And for that, we're going to look to a character in the Bible. His name is Job. If you want to open up, you can try to follow along in your Bible. We're going to go through several passages as we kind of look over the scope of Job's life and over the book in the Old Testament of the Bible written about Job. If you don't have a Bible, it's up on the screen. It's okay. That might actually be easier today. We know actually very little about Job. Okay? We know that he lived approximately at the time of Abraham. At least that's what we believe. So it was before Israel or the Hebrews were really a people. It was before Egypt and all of that kind of history that we have very rich story about. It was around the time of Abraham, and they believe Job lived east of what would become Israel. Now, east of that area is actually fairly significant because most of the population lived in this condensed area that came to be known as Israel. East of that was a little bit of wilderness. It was where if you weren't the primary inheritor of your parents' property, you went east to try to make a name for yourself. East of the land was also where exiles might go, where wanderers might go. But it was also a fruitful land. There was a lot of possibility. It was unsettled. It was untamed. That's where we find Job. At least that's where we assume we find Job. Other than that, we don't really know a whole lot about Job, but we're going to dive into a story. We will learn just a little bit, at least some description about his character. If we start off chapter 1, verse 8, we read this. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There was no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Now this is important, because we're jumping in a few verses in. It's important to understand that this is the description about who Job is. And in terms of a character that we really don't know a lot about, we are being given something here. We know he's from the land of Uz, which is, again, east of what would become Israel, around the same area as Abraham, but we don't know anything else other than this little tidbit that the Lord gives us. He seems to be a believer in God. He seems to be righteous in a lot of ways. He's carrying out a lot of the sacrificial systems and all of that kind of stuff. And he is actually seemingly quite wealthy. He's done pretty well for himself east of all the rest of society, if he was somebody that went off to make a name for himself, he's done quite well. All right? And here, we get this glimpse in verse 8 of chapter 1. We get a glimpse into God's kind of heavenly throne room. It's almost set up as, a lot of times the heavenly throne room is brought up in terms of kind of a courtroom. And that's kind of what we see here, is this almost kind of courtroom scenario where people are being considered, and Job is found extremely favorable. So we have this interchange between the Lord and Satan, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But we have this description: have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. That is Job's description. At the end of the day, in human terms, Job is a good guy. Comparatively speaking, he's doing well. The Lord himself even says, he's upright, he's blameless. There's nobody else on earth. So comparatively speaking, horizontally with other people, other human beings, Job is good, morally good. That's the description. Now, oftentimes we think of the Lord a little bit as this far-off, distant being that is waiting to club us over the head when we do something wrong. Right? He's not so much the judge and jury as much as he seems to be the executioner in a lot of our minds. That's not the picture we get here from Job. Actually, if you were just paying attention to this, the concept of the Lord that you would get from this verse is that he is like a beaming, proud father. Hang on to that picture. The Lord is proud of Job. He delights in Job. He's bragging about Job. I want you to hold on to that picture of God delighting in him, because you're going to have to carry it throughout the rest of the story. It's going to be important to refer back to. Now, the other little interesting thing that I think is worth mentioning is that Satan comes into the picture. Now, what's worth noting is that at this point in time in history of both the writing, but even before the writing, the storytelling about the historical figure of Job, is the concept of Satan had not been well developed yet. There was this kind of theology almost about Satan and demons that hadn't been developed. So the literal word here is actually the tempter. Over time, we come to believe that it's alignment with the same person that we might recognize as Satan, the devil. But even the concept of that hasn't been well developed. When he's actually questioned by God, he comes into the picture, and when he's questioned by God, the Lord says, "What have you been up to?" And he says, "I've been roaming around the earth. I've been going to and fro." What he's doing is what the Bible later talks about as roaming around the earth, prowling like a lion waiting to devour. It's not up front in our face yet, but this tempter becomes the ultimate antagonist. He's the one that over time we develop this concept about the Satan, not just a tempter, but the tempter. And I think it's worth noting that most of our concepts about Satan are embellished and not biblically founded. I think the first thing to pull out of here is that other than here and in another verse that we'll read in just a moment, Satan is not a key character in this passage. He does move the plot forward, but he's not a key character. Why? Because he's insignificant. Not insignificant in terms of the whole historical narrative of Scripture. He is a character that pops up plenty, but he's insignificant in comparison with the people he's around right now. Hollywood and other works like Dante's Inferno have made hell and Satan into this bigger character than he actually is. Most of our pictures of this horned red figure with a pitchfork tail and this kind of a demon trident in his hand, that's not the work of the Bible. That's the work of Hollywood and Dante. Satan is not an equal and opposite to the Lord. He is a spiritual being that is insignificant in comparison with the Lord. In fact, as the Lord talks to him here, there is zero sense of any threat on behalf of the Lord. When you're thinking about spiritual attack, think about that. The Lord's not concerned with him. He's like, oh, what have you been up to? Okay. Cool, man. He's so not concerned with Satan that he even looks at Job and he's like, you're not even powerful to mess with him. Have you considered my servant? I'm so proud of him. He's so cool. He's way better than you. Yeah. He's way better, and he's finite. He's flesh. He's so much better than you. What's funny is Satan says he just came back from roaming the earth, and then the Lord pointedly says to him, well, have you considered Job? There's no one on earth who's as upright as he is, including you. Satan is insignificant. That's why we'll read about him twice, and then he's not even in the story anymore. He's insignificant. But the Lord says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He brags on his servant Job a little bit. And then there's this interesting interchange. The enemy, the tempter, Satan says, you know what? He's not proud for nothing. He's not happy. He doesn't love you for nothing. He loves you because you've blessed him beyond belief. You've given him so much. You've given him sons and daughters and livestock and property. Why wouldn't he love you? And then there's this interchange where the enemy says, you know what? If you were to allow me to take all that away, he'd curse you. He'd turn his back on you. And so he does it. And if we go to chapter 2, we see kind of a turning point in the story, the next mention of the tempter, verses 7 and 8. After the discussion between Satan and the Lord was done, verse 7 says, So Satan, the tempter, went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet and to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery, scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. So catch this. The most upright person in all of the earth has everything taken away. If you read the rest of the narrative, his sons, his servants, everything that he loved was killed or taken from him. Literally stolen or killed. All of his property was essentially gone or barren. It was wrecked. All of his produce and all of his crops were destroyed. He was raided. His kids were taken and killed. The only thing that was left to him was his wife and a few of his friends. It goes to such a bad extreme that we see that he has kind of almost like a leprosy and these sores, and the only relief that he's getting from any of his anguish is to grab some broken pottery that I would imagine is a little bit of leftover, maybe a little bit of a sign, a little bit of a remnant from the attacks on his property. He was probably picking up shrapnel and scraping himself with it. He was so much in anguish that the only thing that seemingly brought relief was scraping the sores off of his body. The Job who was better than any person on earth has been humbled and brought low. And what frustrates me more than anything else in this whole story is we don't know why. We don't know why. We're not given a reason. But Job, he's thinking the same thing. He's thinking, why is this happening? The Lord had blessed me. He had given me all of this stuff, and now I have nothing. Everything has been taken from me. Why? Why is this happening? And then Job does something interesting. After he starts finding a piece of broken pottery and starts scraping himself with it, it says, he sat among the ashes. He sat among the ashes. Now, the ashes were dumped outside of society. If there was a city, the ash pile would be outside. If it was just a village or a town or a house, it was dumped outside of the property. That's where everything that was ceremonially unclean was dumped. It was the place that bones would be dumped, burnt things would be deposited. This was almost literally the place of death. But ashes also signified mourning. When people were upset, they would tear their clothes and they would put on death mourning garments, and they would sit in and sprinkle on themselves ashes. And that's the position Job takes. The position of somebody who was one of the wealthiest in the land, one of the most upright people, absolutely blessed by God, is now sitting quite literally in the place of death, on the ash. Now this is significant because of what comes next. As Job is sitting on the ash, if you continue reading the story, the first character that comes to him is one of the only things left to Job from his family. It's his wife. And his wife says to him, Job, why don't you just accept your fate? Why don't you curse God and die? You are in this low state. You had everything and now you're at the bottom. Clearly life is not going for you or going well for you. Why don't you curse God and die? I don't know about you, but if I were counseling them in marriage, I think there were probably a lot of issues going into this. You don't go from, hey, we're all good, to why don't you curse God and die, just like that. They probably had some things to work through, but think about it. Put yourself in Job's wife's shoes. There's two responses here, and we're going to unpack one of them totally in a second. We have the response of Job. His response is, sit in the ash. And we have the response of Job's wife, who has also lost everything. And her response is, let's just die. Let's curse God. It's his fault. Let's die. How about that? Job doesn't pay attention to her. He doesn't listen. She's chosen her response, which is blaming God, not even sitting with the question. She takes the easiest answer. It's God's fault. Let's curse him, and then we can die with whatever dignity we have left. But Job says no, and he sits in the ash. Not long after that, he has some friends that come around them, and for a few days they're silent. They're at their best at this point in time in the story. But eventually they speak. And Job's friends prove to not really be friends at all. As they start talking to him, they start having arguments, and they actually get to the point where it goes from just simple questions, they start to blame Job. And in some ways, they start to kind of defame the name of the Lord in his character and in what he's doing. And they don't even know it. They're not trying to do these things. They're trying to find the shortest, easiest answer to all of Job's problems. They weren't willing to wait for 30 seconds. They weren't willing to wait and explore the answers. They weren't willing to wait and see what God would do. They were just trying to find the best right answer. If that came from blaming God, they blamed God. If that came from blaming Job, then they blamed Job. Time and time again, they kept asking things like, why don't you just admit what you've done wrong? Why don't you just admit it? You could get all of this over with if you just changed your ways, if you just confessed your sin, if you just repented. You'd be out of all of this agony. And Job just repeatedly says, I would if I could, but I don't know what's going on. I haven't found my why yet. And Job sits in the ash. He waits for days and days. He waits. If you continue on, just another few chapters, we get to chapter 7, verse 20, and it's like Job is almost at his breaking point. You can feel the anguish in his heart. You can feel what's going on inside of him. Verse 20 of chapter 7 says, if I have sinned, what have I done to you? This is Job speaking to the Lord. If I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who sees everything we do. Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Now the interesting thing is the word if is not even present in Hebrew. This was written in Hebrew, translated into English. The word if isn't in there. So what Job really says is he's willing to just admit everything. His heart is torn open. In his search for why, he says, I've sinned, but what have I done? I've sinned. Lord, just tell me what I've done. I'm willing to admit anything at this point. I just need to know. I have all these questions and I don't understand. So, you know what? If I have sinned, tell me what I've done. Would you just let me know? Why have you made me your target, Lord? What is going on? And he wrestles with it. You see the heart of Job really, truly come out. In commenting on Job's response, scholar Francis Anderson says, if he seems defiant, it is the daring of faith. All Job has known about God, he still believes, but God's inexplicable ways have his mind perplexed to breaking point. Job is in the right, but he does not know that God is watching with silent compassion and admiration. That's why I wanted you to hold on to God's description of Job. He's like a proud father who just absolutely adores his child, and even in the midst of his suffering, even in the midst of this heart cry of, what have I done, Lord? If you would just tell me why I have become your target, I would happily change what I've done. I would happily become anything that I've done, but God remains silent in the midst of it. And he just watches, still a proud and compassionate father. You see, God wasn't proud that Job was successful. God was proud of Job. He just was. That even in the midst of this, he didn't curse God and die. He still holds on to his beliefs, but he's willing to sit in the ash and wrestle with his questions, wrestle honestly, look at all sides of this, and truly and honestly explore what is going on. I think he's proud, and he looks at Job with compassion in the midst of his suffering. The fact that Job doesn't just curse him. He doesn't take the easy answer. He doesn't listen to his friends. He didn't listen to his wife. He stays in the ash. He could have gotten up out of the ash and said, you know what? Despite everything that's going on in my body, I made it once out there. I can make it again. We can have more kids. We can grow more crops. We can hire more servants. Job could have changed his circumstances, but he's not interested in his circumstances. You see, God isn't pleased with him because Job is just faithful with his stuff. He's pleased with Job because Job is delighted in God. That delight in God carries him through all of these questions, all of these doubts, even to the point of crying out, God, why have you made me your target? What in the world have I ever done to you? Oftentimes in our wandering, in our doubting, in our questioning, until we've gotten to that point, we can't see the turning point of the story. It takes sitting in the ash. It takes exploring the questions, exploring the doubt, allowing our heart just to be absolutely torn in two before the turning point of the story. This is a little bit of a turning point for Job. Now the conversation goes on. Actually, it goes on for lots more chapters. It goes on for over 30 more chapters. As Job is in discussion with his friends, as Job is questioning God, as Job is questioning himself, and his friends continue to accuse him, one after another, they just bring up accusation against both him and God. And maybe only a slight fraction of the time are they ever right. And after the last of Job's friends speaks, there's a storm. Something happens. The book of Job calls it a whirlwind. Whatever that experience was, whatever it sounded like, after that storm, maybe even at the tail end of it, God speaks. Janine last week used the word theophany. Theophany is just a really fancy Bible scholar word for God made a lot of loud noise or showed up in a way that we don't understand. Right? That's what a theophany is. This is a theophany. This is a loud noise or something crazy and violent going on, and God shows up in the midst of it somehow. We don't know what Job and his friends heard. We don't know what it sounded like, if they heard the voice audibly, or sometimes as we refer to hearing God speak, maybe an impression in our hearts, but they understood what God was saying. If we look at chapter 38, verses 1 through 3, God speaks. After chapter 1, after this discourse with the Lord and Satan, the tempter, the deceiver, we now see 37 chapters later, we see God speak again. All of that time, Job has been willing to sit in the ash. He's been willing to explore his questions. He didn't give up, and now something happens. Verse 1, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I've always wanted to say that to somebody. I don't have anything that comes after that, though. That's the problem. Brace yourself like a man, and I will question you, and you shall answer me. This is a serious moment. This is like everybody is talking for 37 chapters, and they're all arguing with each other, and then this whirlwind comes, and the Lord speaks, and everybody's like, all right, okay, cool. It's like when the parents lose their cool a little bit, and the shout comes out, and all the kids are like, all right, yeah, Mom, whatever, I'll do the dishes. Yeah, I got this. Yep, cool, I'm sorry. That's the moment. The Lord speaks, and everybody listens. The Lord could have spoke at the beginning. The bad stuff could have happened to Job, and the wife could have not even come in yet. The friends might not have even come to Job yet, and God could have come in and rescued them. He could have come in and rescued Job. He could have come in and said, hey, let me tell you why this is happening. There's this weird thing. We had this conversation. Things got a little out of hand, and next thing you know, your family's gone. That's not what happens. 37 chapters of questions, 37 chapters of Job sitting in the ash, waiting for his why. And then finally the Lord speaks. And the Lord speaks for the rest of the book. And he does exactly what he tells Job he will do. He says, listen, now I'm going to speak and you're going to listen. I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer me. All this time, you guys have been talking, you guys have been asking questions, and you've been speaking in ignorance. In fact, if you pay attention, it sounds like a stinging rebuke from God, but what God is doing is he's not shaming them for trying to figure things out. He's actually saying, hey, you spoke in ignorance. You really don't know what you're talking about. Which is just kind of my life motto at this point. When in doubt, I really don't know what I'm talking about, okay? I'll say it confidently. Job and his friends were just saying it confidently. They didn't know what they were talking about, and the Lord points that out. He says, who are you? You guys are talking all about me, but who are you? You have a finite perspective. You're asking questions that are way above your pay grade. And you're speaking as if you know what you're talking about. That's like me talking anything financial or scientific. Way out of my depth. Job's friends were way out of their depth. As we continue on reading, at one of the very last sections of the book of Job, the Lord speaks and sums up to Job, and he says, listen, I'm going to restore everything. And he does. He restores everything. And then he tells Job's friends, you guys were the ones that were ignorant. Job was right. He was asking all these why questions. He didn't have a reason. He was right. He claimed his innocence and his uprightness. Job was right. God never stopped being proud of Job through all the questioning. The only thing he did was rebuke his friends and probably the wife as well for being ignorant. And then God restores everything back to Job. But he makes the friends make some sacrifices, basically apologizing to Job. And the Lord, I love the part, the Lord's like, hey, have Job pray for you. You guys are idiots. Job got it right. As I was reflecting on this, as I was thinking about the big picture of the book of Job and all of the questions that might have been going through his mind, one thing stood out to me. And I think this is the main point. This is the thing I want us to take away this morning. It's about questions and doubts. It's this, that if we learn something from Job, it's that questions aren't obstacles. They are opportunities to see God revealed. Not one time was the Lord ever scared of Job's questioning. If he was, if I were in the Lord's shoes, I would have been like, hey, guys, you got me all wrong. Let me defend myself. You're saying all sorts of things that just aren't true about me. Can I at least speak to my own character? But he lets it go on for 37 chapters. Because the Lord knows that just as Job had been faithful in the beginning, he was going to be faithful as he sat in the ash and waited for the revelation of God. And the Lord looked at all of this and he heard the questions coming from Job and he remained silent. Why? Because the Lord's not scared of our questions. He's not scared about our doubts. And this could be whether you just started hanging out around Jesus people or whether you grew up as a person in a family who followed Jesus your whole life. There comes a point in time when we start having doubts. There comes a point in time where we start asking some hard questions. When we start thinking about things differently. Right now in the world we live in, there's a lot of people who are going through what we currently call deconstructive faith experiences. They're picking apart, they're disassembling their faith worldview, and they're questioning each bit of it. And I want to let you know, if that's a place that you are right now on any level of that spectrum, the Lord isn't afraid of your questions. In fact, the Lord doesn't see those as obstacles to faith. They don't get in the way of faith. They are opportunities for you to see his revelation. It may take 37 chapters. It may take sitting in the ash for a long time, for wrestling with that why for a long time. And it may seem like you're never going to hear what you want to hear, but then God, I promise you, he will reveal himself. He will show up and he'll say, you know what? It's okay. Your questions didn't always make a lot of sense. You thought you knew some things that you didn't know, but now I'm going to show you myself. And if you read the revelation that God gives Job and his friends, it is through this question, this rhetorical questioning that he gives them, but it's all around his power. Did you make this? Did you put these things in place? Did you establish this? God's speaking and revealing his power. I hate the book of Job. I hate the book of Job because we don't ever get the why answered. You can read it beginning to end. It doesn't matter how many times you read the book of Job. The why did this happen never gets answered. But here's the thing that I believe about Job. It isn't the questions getting answered that resolves the tension. It's God's revelation of himself in the midst of the tension that makes it okay. It's God's revealing his power and might that says, you know what, I may not get the why answered, but I'm going to hold on to this anyway. I can accept that I'm a finite being and not everything is in a Western cause and effect understanding way of life. So I'm going to receive the revelation of God, and I'm going to understand that these questions are just going to lead me deeper into a revelation of who God is, his power, his might, and catch this, his delight in you. If we are willing to wait, if we are willing to wrestle these questions out, we can do that. Now, there might be some of us who aren't necessarily wrestling with those questions right now. When we look around the world at people deconstructing their faith or questioning it or figuring out what they actually believe, you can call it anything you want, but we sometimes as a church, we look at people like that and we think, come on, just get it together. In doing so, we actually take on the role of Job's friends. We think, just take the easy answer. Just take the quick way out. There's another person who cautions us against doing this. His name is Jude. In Jude, chapter 1, fun fact, there's only one chapter. In Jude, chapter 1, verse 22, one short, simple statement. Be merciful to those who doubt. Be merciful to those who doubt. This is a powerful statement coming from Jude. This is one who understands that questions aren't obstacles, they're opportunities to see God revealed. Because Jude himself, let me give you just a really quick character background. Jude himself identifies himself as the brother of James. He does that because he probably, we can only guess, he probably doesn't see himself as worthy of identifying himself with the real relationship that he had in life, which is the brother of Jesus. Jude, the brother of James. James, who was the brother of Jesus. Jude, I think, introduces himself like that, and he cautions us to be merciful to those who doubt because he himself doubted. He was not a follower of his brother. He didn't believe his brother. We don't know at what point in time he kind of jumped on the discipleship bandwagon of Jesus, but we know he was not included in the 12. He wasn't part of the following that we're aware of. He and his family oftentimes stayed far back. They saw the things Jesus was doing and they couldn't accept it. They started asking all sorts of questions, but at some point in time, Jude sat in the ash asking questions long enough that he saw the revelation of God and he could write, "Be merciful with others who doubt," in a way that only one who truly has doubted themselves, who's truly questioned themselves, can really, truly have authority to say it. Be merciful with those who doubt. I want to caution us as a church family or as believers or whatever title you want to use, be merciful with those who doubt. Those questions that they're asking, God is not concerned with them. Not in the terms of being worried. God is not worried about those questions. They aren't obstacles to their faith. It's not something just to get over really quick and get on with your life. Just follow Jesus. Just accept the truth. Why can't you see it? Maybe the Lord has them in the ash so that they can see the fuller revelation of the Lord. And then when everything is restored or when everything is given for the first time, it won't just be taken for granted. It will be something that nobody or nothing in the whole world can shake. When you see God revealed in the whirlwind, your life is changed. You may not have all the answers, but that revelation, that truth, we have to hold out long enough for it. So be merciful with others as they doubt. Whether we're around people who are doubting or whether we ourselves are doubting, there's a way that we can go forward. There's a couple things we can understand in order to hang on to that and be merciful or to walk through our own ash heap and keep our eyes on Jesus. The first one is this: bad things happen to good people. They do. Bad things happen to good people. That's what we learned from Job. Hey, have you checked out my servant Job? He's upright. There's nobody else in the whole world that's like Job. And bad things happen to him. Now, when we think from human standards, we have to understand that goodness, that moral quality about somebody, that thing that makes them good, is comparative. It's subjective. It's subjective to you being compared against me, being compared against somebody else. And in that scale, there can be people who are more good than others. There's a qualitative difference in our goodness from one another. But what's interesting is when God calls Job good, he's saying it in terms of himself. You see, in terms of all of us, in comparison with God, we actually are on the same level. So understand this, that good is a comparative term and bad things happen to good people. Absolutely, they do. So when we ask questions like, why did that happen to me? What if there's a really unsatisfying answer? What if the answer is simply that we are in the midst of a broken world and you happen to find yourself at the center of a fracture point in the goodness of the world? If somebody were just to tell you that, it wouldn't help. It would be intellectually and emotionally unsatisfying. If Job had gotten the answer of why, he would have been like, well, that did not help at all. It's the revelation of God. It's the knowing that God is the ultimate good. It's the only thing that can truly put our goodness and the bad things or the questions or the doubts that we have in life in their place. Once we know that bad things can happen to good people, it frees us up emotionally and intellectually to do the next thing, which is sit in the ash. One of the first things Job did after losing everything and finding relief is he sat in the ash. In this sense, the ash is just a simple metaphor for saying sit in your questions. Sit in the place of that discomfort. Sit in the place and be willing to wait. We have lost our ability to wait. We always want to find the quick answer. That is the opposite of sitting in the ash. That is like listening to Job's wife who says, curse God and die. We want the easy out. We want the Google answer. We want a Wikipedia our faith life answer. I love this quote from author and scholar A.J. Swoboda. When he's talking about questions in our life, he just says it in a really great way for us to hang on to. And this is, take this to the bank. This is good advice. Order your pizzas and books online, but don't take your deepest doubts and questions there. And then he turns it and he says, bring them to us, God's people on the ground. Please don't replace us. Question the assumption that a PhD is the same as being wise. Yes, do that. Or the assumption that the most viewed or viral has anything to do with veracity. There are assumptions that we've made that popularity means that you're right. So we look to social media influencers, or we look to the top-rated blogs or whatever, and we think that that's truth. Or we look at somebody with credentials and we say that's truth. There is a revelation of God, and that is truth. So I want to encourage you, one of the steps in sitting in the ashes, don't find the easy way out. Please don't bring your questions to Google. You may never know, some of the best answers may be 4 pages down the search results. It takes sitting in the ash. It takes going past the fold. It takes longer than the 2 to 3 second load time on the website. We have to sit in the ash. We have to wait. Finally, in just kind of turning this a little bit, has less to do with being on the ash heap ourselves and more, again, about being with others who sit on the ash heap. Here's my final piece of actionable advice. Don't be like Job's friends. Don't be like Job's friends. Don't be like his wife. Don't be like his friends. One of the most common critiques I hear about Christians as other people are going through doubts is this. They simply offered me platitudes. Now, a platitude, for those of you who aren't aware, a platitude is a moral statement that's overused and underwhelming. It's hard to latch onto. It doesn't hit. It's not very significant because it's overused and it's very generic, but it has to do with it's moral in quality. Meaning, you know what? God is good all the time. All the time? God is good. Yeah, you know it. You're versed in your platitudes. I don't know whether to congratulate you or not. Right? A platitude doesn't hit. It doesn't help. It's an easy answer to help people get off the ash heap so that you and I aren't inconvenienced. Janine shared with us last week that God oftentimes calls us into uncomfortable places. When we are with people in the ash or sitting on the ash ourselves, it's an uncomfortable place. We have to be okay with being uncomfortable. Anything else is a fast answer. It's trying to get out of the discomfort. Let's get comfortable with discomfort. Let's be okay. Just like God is with other people's questions, we can be okay with other people's questions. Knowing that in our finite understanding, someday we're going to stand before the Lord and he's going to say, okay, brace yourself. Who do you think you are? You talked about me like you had the corner on the market of knowledge about me. You don't really know. I don't really know. We're doing our best to put this together, so let's treat others with equity and grace as they're figuring it out as well. And understand that we're all just trying to figure it out. The only one who can truly reveal himself is not you or I, it's the Lord. And we have to sit in the ash. We have to be with others long enough in the ash that that moment comes. Let's be quick to listen, slow to judge, slow to speak, quick to offer grace and mercy. Jesus said it really simply. Treat others as you would have them treat you. gracious with others because you know you want grace. Whether you're on the ash or sitting with other people in the ash, be willing to ask the hard questions. Be willing to explore. Be willing to wait. I think if we could grab hold of this, we would be a different kind of church. We would be a church that's actually a safe place for people to explore. What if we were the safest place people with doubt could find? In a world that's actually increasingly judgmental, whether it's political, moral, or whatever, any other kind of position you could possibly define in society, what if the church was the safe place in that? What if we were just piles of ashes, waiting for people to sit down, take a seat, and say, I don't know why this is happening. And we can say, you know what, I'm not really sure either, but let's just sit together and we'll wait for the revelation from God. He'll get it sorted. We can be that people.